Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Angel Torres was last seen in Biddeford, Maine, at 2 a.m. on May 21, 1999. He had been visiting friends in the area and spending time selling drugs in Biddeford and the nearby towns of Saco and Old Orchard Beach. On the night he disappeared, Torres and his friend, Jason Anthony J. Carney, were at a friend's apartment in Biddeford. According to Carney, the two of them went out to meet some customers who were dissatisfied with the quality of drugs they had purchased. Carney later returned to the apartment alone, disheveled and upset. Carney explained that he and Torres had walked to the Whistle Stop, a nearby convenience store. At around 2 a.m., Torres was reportedly looking for a ride either home or to North Conway, New Hampshire, which is about a half-hour drive from his home in Denmark, Maine. Carney said that a man in a red truck was going to give Torres a ride. After that, Torres has never been heard from again. His family didn't report him missing until May 24th, when his girlfriend contacted them after he failed to show up for work. The last two people known to have seen Torres were Stephen and Daniel Sanborn, who were also the last people to see 15-year-old Ashley Erin Willett, a young girl who was strangled in Scarborough, Maine in February 1999, just a few months before Torres disappeared. The Sanborn brothers had attended high school with Ashley, and Stephen had briefly dated her. She had been at their home the night she was killed. Stephen and Daniel have been considered possible suspects in Ashley's murder, but have never been charged. Torres told his parents that he knew Ashley and had said he pretty much knew who killed her. This has led to a theory that Torres's disappearance might have been connected to his alleged knowledge of Ashley's death. However, this theory has never been confirmed, and Ashley's murder remains unsolved. Another theory surrounding Torres's disappearance is that it was drug-related. Investigators have speculated that Carney may have been involved in Torres's disappearance and that he might not have been truthful about the drug deal they were involved in. Carney moved to Rhode Island after Torres went missing, and he died of a suspected drug overdose in 2015 at the age of 36. At the time of his disappearance, Torres had recently graduated from Freiburg Academy, where he had played soccer and basketball. In 1999, he was a student at Framingham State University in Massachusetts, majoring in business and psychology and minoring in Spanish. He had recently moved into an apartment in Barre, Massachusetts, with his girlfriend. His family described him as someone who enjoyed sports and had dreams of owning a sporting goods store. Foul play is suspected in Torres's case, and it remains unsolved. After his disappearance, his parents applied for and received a certificate of death for him, even though his body has never been found. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance continue to raise many questions. Sharon Smith was last seen in Bangor, Maine, on August 25, 1980. She worked the evening shift at the Paramount Lounge on Harlow Street that day, then vanished after her shift ended. The lounge, which has since been closed, was located on the ground floor of a hotel where Sharon had been renting a room. When authorities later checked her room, they found that the door was left open and her purse was still inside. Despite this, Sharon has never been heard from again. Sharon had 2 young children at the time of her disappearance. Her children were in their father's care when she vanished, and she had been preparing to move to Florida with her parents and 5 siblings. Sharon's sudden disappearance left many questions unanswered, and as time passed, her family became more concerned for her safety and well-being. Sharon's sometime boyfriend, Franklin George Gilks, has been implicated in her disappearance. He allegedly told several people that he had killed Sharon during an argument, claiming he had broken her neck. This disturbing admission raised suspicion about his involvement in Sharon's disappearance. Years later, when Sharon's daughter grew up and began searching for answers, she received an anonymous telephone call from someone who claimed that Gilks had killed Sharon. The caller reportedly said, "Things got carried away," and warned Sharon's daughter to leave things alone, or she could also be killed. This chilling message only added to the mystery and the belief that Sharon's disappearance was far from a simple case of abandonment. Further leads emerged when police received an anonymous letter suggesting that Sharon was buried at a residence in the 100 block of New Boston Road in Herman, Maine. This house had once been the childhood home of Gilks, and his mother and brother still lived there at the time. The house, which was a converted barn, was eventually torn down. Investigators decided to search the property, bringing in a cadaver dog to help with the search. The dog indicated the possible presence of human remains in an area where the house had stood. The authorities then excavated the front yard, hoping to find something that could provide more answers. But after digging, they found nothing of interest. Gilks, who had been a key figure in the case, passed away in 2008. Sharon's children's father is also deceased, and tragically, their oldest child died during his teenage years. Despite these losses, Sharon's daughter continues to hope for answers and justice in her mother's case. Since Sharon's disappearance, there has been no activity on her Social Security number, leading both investigators and Sharon's family to believe that she is no longer alive. To this day, Sharon Smith's disappearance remains unsolved. Kimberly Morrow is a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes. One distinguishing feature of Kimberly is a surgical scar on her back. She also has multiple piercings in her ears, 3 in her right ear and 4 in her left. Kimberly lived in Maine, specifically in Jay, with her parents Richard and Pat. Unfortunately, her mother, Pat, passed away from cancer just 2 years after Kimberly's disappearance. Kimberly was the youngest of 3 daughters, and she had 2 older sisters. Kimberly had a passion for writing poetry and was actively involved in gymnastics and cheerleading during her time at school. She attended Jay High School and had dreams of becoming a model after graduation. Kimberly was also a contestant in beauty pageants, further indicating her aspirations and ambitions. The night of May 10, 1986, marked a pivotal moment in Kimberly's life. It was prom night, and Kimberly, who was in her junior year of high school, was supposed to attend the junior class prom. However, she had a falling out with her boyfriend, Mike Staples, which led to her changing her plans. The argument between them was significant enough that Kimberly chose to forego the prom and instead spent time with a friend, Rhonda Breton. The two of them had plans to meet up with 2 older men, both around 25 years old. Around 11 p.m. on May 10, 1986, Kimberly went back to her home. The only other person at her house at the time was one of her sisters. Kimberly told her sister she was heading out, but assured her she would be back within an hour. Kimberly was last seen leaving her house, getting into a late-model white Pontiac Trans Am with Rhonda and one of the older men. One of the most puzzling aspects of Kimberly's departure was that she left without any of her belongings. She left her purse, wallet, and keys behind. She didn't even take a jacket, despite it being quite cold outside. This suggests that Kimberly was planning on coming back home shortly, rather than staying out for a prolonged period or leaving home for good. At around 3:45 a.m. on May 11, 1986, Brian Edmond, one of the men Kimberly had been with, stated that they were driving back towards Kimberly's house. They were just half a mile away when Kimberly reportedly became visibly upset over the argument she had with Mike earlier that evening. She then demanded that Brian pull over so she could walk the rest of the way home. Brian said that he complied, letting her out of the car, and then he and Rhonda drove off. This was the last time anyone saw Kimberly. The next morning, when Kimberly did not return home, her parents immediately filed a missing person report. However, for the first 4 months, the police treated her disappearance as a runaway case, which proved to be incredibly frustrating for her family. Richard, Kimberly's father, knew his daughter would not have left home on her own, especially given that she was afraid of the dark and had left without any of her necessities. It was a bitter blow for the family to see the investigation delayed because authorities initially treated the case as something more trivial. Kimberly's family, especially her father, strongly believed that the police were wrong in assuming Kimberly had run away. Richard was certain that Kimberly wouldn't have walked home alone at night, especially in 38-degree weather, without a jacket. The delay in the investigation, caused by the initial misclassification of her disappearance, likely hampered the ability to gather important evidence in the first critical months. After 4 months, the case was reclassified from a runaway to a missing and endangered person. However, the gap in time meant that many potential leads had been lost or gone cold. Rhonda, who had been with Kimberly that night, corroborated Brian's version of events. She confirmed that Kimberly had asked to be let out of the car and had intended to walk home. There was no indication from either Rhonda or Brian that something more sinister occurred during their drive. Unfortunately, much about what happened that night remains unclear. The 4 individuals, Kimberly, Rhonda, and the 2 men, are believed to have spent the night driving around town while drinking. Some speculate that they may have gone to a teenage drinking party or a house party, but there is no concrete information about their whereabouts or activities during those hours. Police have reportedly questioned all of the people involved, but the details of their interviews have not been made public. Richard is adamant that Kimberly was likely murdered within hours of leaving her house. He is especially suspicious of Brian, who remains a person of interest in the case. Despite this, Brian has never been formally charged with anything related to her disappearance. Richard has stayed in contact with Brian over the years, hoping that Brian will eventually come forward with the truth about what happened that night. In 2015, the police conducted a search of a 5-acre property owned by Brian, hoping to find some evidence or trace of Kimberly. Sadly, their efforts proved fruitless, and no new clues were uncovered. Despite this, Richard has continued his pursuit of answers, even utilizing his connections with friends in the police department to keep the investigation alive. Cadaver dogs were also used in an attempt to locate any evidence on Kimberly Street, but once again, the search yielded nothing. An intriguing lead surfaced shortly after Kimberly's disappearance. A concrete pad was laid at a farm stand in Livermore, Maine, and rumors quickly spread that Kimberly's body might have been disposed of there, with the concrete poured over her. Years later, authorities used the best available technology to investigate the area, digging up the slab of concrete. Despite these efforts, no evidence suggesting Kimberly's body was found. Another figure of interest in Kimberly's case is Kelvin Tidwell, a man who owned an arcade in Livermore Falls, Maine, during the 1980s. The arcade was located near the police station and was a popular hangout spot for local teens, including Kimberly and her friends. Kelvin was known for being manipulative, and there were negative reports from people who knew him during his time at the arcade. These reports paint him as a bully and someone who had a reputation for using manipulation to control others. Many people, including Richard and some of the police, have speculated that Kelvin could have been involved in Kimberly's disappearance, as he might have been one of the last people to see her that night. However, despite this suspicion, Kelvin has never been named a person of interest or suspect in the case. Police believe that the last 3 people to see Kimberly that night were either Brian, Kelvin, or Mike Staples, her boyfriend. Theories about Kimberly's disappearance vary, and Richard, as well as Kimberly's sisters, do not believe her disappearance was premeditated. They suspect it might have been an accident, but even so, they remain desperate for answers about what happened that night. They know that there are people who hold the key to solving the case, but are hesitant to come forward. Some have proposed that Mike Staples, Kimberly's boyfriend, could be involved in her disappearance. Given their earlier argument, Mike could have been waiting for Kimberly when she returned home, or perhaps he was angered by the fact that she had been out with older men. The motive could stem from jealousy or unresolved emotions. Another possibility is that Brian, who was with Kimberly throughout the night, could have accidentally been involved in her disappearance. He might have been with her while she drank, and something may have gone wrong. Kimberly could have had a negative reaction to the alcohol or something she consumed that night, and the group may have panicked and disposed of her body to cover up an accident. There are also those who think Rhonda knows more than she has shared. As Kimberly's close friend that night, she may have information that could help piece together what happened. Richard has always believed that Rhonda holds vital information that could shed light on the events of that night. It is possible that she was scared into silence, either by Brian, Kelvin, or someone else involved. Recent developments in the case have provided some hope. Richard reported that a dying man came forward with a tip about Kimberly's disappearance, and they are following up on this lead. However, The details of the tip have not been released to the public. Richard remains hopeful that they are closer to finding answers than ever before. Richard has expressed that he wants nothing more than to bring his daughter home, lay her to rest next to her mother and grandmother, and give her the justice she deserves. He remains committed to finding answers and getting the closure his family so desperately needs. In conclusion, Kimberly's case remains one of the most perplexing and tragic disappearances. The combination of missing details, conflicting reports, and the reluctance of those involved to come forward has made it incredibly difficult to uncover the truth. However, Richard and Kimberly's family continue to hold on to hope, believing that one day they will have the answers they seek and that the person responsible for Kimberly's disappearance will be held accountable. Virginia Pictou Noyes was a patient at the Eastern Maine Medical Center in Bangor, Maine, on April 24, 1993, after being assaulted outside a tavern, allegedly by her husband, Larry Noyes, and his brother, Roger Noyes Jr. Larry was charged with domestic assault and taken to jail, while Roger received a court summons on an assault charge. Larry made bail and was released, and he and Roger were Virginia's last known visitors at the hospital. At some point during the evening, Virginia apparently left the hospital without permission before her checkup was complete. She told hospital staff that she needed to get home to her children. The next morning, she was seen at a truck stop in Holton, Maine, where she made phone calls to various people, asking for a ride home to Easton, Maine. However, Virginia has never been heard from again. The assault charges against the Noyes brothers were dropped after Virginia's disappearance. Without her testimony, there was insufficient evidence to move forward with the case. Virginia's family believes she was murdered, and police also suspect foul play in her disappearance. Larry and Roger are the primary suspects in her case. Both men had criminal records for offenses such as burglary, vandalism, and arson. Virginia had often confided in her brother about the abuse she suffered at the hands of Larry, and she had tried to leave him with her children on several occasions, but Larry would always apologize, and they would reconcile. Larry made claims that Virginia had a romantic relationship with his brother, Roger, before marrying him, and that one of their children might have actually been Roger's. Despite these allegations, Larry maintained his innocence regarding Virginia's disappearance. He claimed that Virginia left a note saying she was leaving and would return when all their children were grown. Roger Noyes Jr. passed away in 2009. In 2011, Larry pleaded guilty to several domestic violence charges unrelated to Virginia's case. By 2017, Larry had become homeless, suffering from serious health problems, and using a wheelchair for mobility. He died of liver failure in the summer of 2018. At the time of her disappearance, Virginia resided in Easton, Maine, but many of her relatives lived in Nova Scotia, Canada. Before her marriage to Larry, she had 4 children with different men, the firstborn when she was just 14 years old, and she dropped out of high school during her junior year. Virginia married Larry at age 22, and together they had 3 additional children. Tragically, Virginia's 2 youngest children died in a fire in 1990, 3 years before her disappearance. After Virginia went missing, her other 3 children were taken from Larry's custody and eventually adopted by another family. Virginia's loved ones describe her as a devoted mother who would never have abandoned her family. Despite this, her case remains unsolved, and the truth of what happened to her is still unknown. Isla Reynolds was last seen when her father, Justin DiPietro, put her to bed at their home on Violet Avenue in Waterville, Maine, at 8 p.m. on December 16, 2011. She disappeared during the night, and by the next morning, she was nowhere to be found. Justin called the police at 8:50 a.m. on December 17, 2011, reporting his daughter missing. At the time of her disappearance, Justin, his sister, his girlfriend, and the girlfriend's 2 children were all at the residence. Authorities have stated that Justin has not been cooperative with the investigation, and they believe the adults who were present in the home that night are withholding information. Investigators discovered Isla's blood in several places within Justin's home, including in her first-floor bedroom and in Justin's basement bedroom, where he and his girlfriend, along with her child, had slept the night Isla vanished. The total amount of blood found was about a cup, and there were signs that someone had attempted to clean up the stains. These findings raised further suspicion about what happened to Isla that night. At the time of Isla's disappearance, her mother, Trista Reynolds, was in a 10-day substance abuse treatment program. The day before Isla went missing, Trista had filed for sole custody of her daughter. 2 months earlier, Isla had been placed in Justin's custody by the Maine Department of Health and Human Services, but Justin did not know about Trista's custody filing. In April 2012, investigators found items of interest behind the Hathaway Creative Center in the Kennebec River, about a mile from Justin's home, but the nature of these items has not been disclosed. By May 2012, nearly 6 months after Isla's disappearance, authorities publicly stated that they believed she was dead, although they did not think she had been abducted. Isla was declared legally dead in 2017, with the court recording that she had likely died around the time she was reported missing. In December 2018, 7 years after Isla's disappearance, Trista filed a wrongful death suit against Justin, seeking unspecified monetary damages. However, Trista stated that the true purpose of the suit was to get answers about what happened to her daughter and to recover her body. Justin maintained his innocence and claimed he had no idea where Isla was. He explained that the blood found in his house was from a single incident when Isla had been sick. In 2022, the wrongful death suit was expanded to include Justin's mother, Phoebe DiPietro, and his sister, Alicia DiPietro, as defendants. Based on new, unspecified evidence, Trista alleged that the women played a role in Isla's death and the subsequent cover-up of the crime. Despite this, no one has officially been named as a suspect in Isla's disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Pauline Rourke was last seen in Fairfield, Maine, on December 15, 1976. At the time, she lived in a mobile home off Route 139 with a distant relative, Albert P. Cochran. Her 12-year-old daughter, Honey, was the last person to see her mother. Honey reported that she heard her mother and Albert arguing the night before Pauline disappeared. According to Honey, their arguments were common, as Albert wanted Pauline to be his girlfriend. The morning of her mother's disappearance, Honey woke up and saw Pauline lying on her side in bed, seemingly asleep and not moving. Honey kissed her on the head, assumed she was just sleeping, and left for school. However, when Honey returned home that afternoon, her mother was gone, and she has never been heard from again. A few days later, Honey's aunt came to pick her up, and she was taken to live in Vermont. Honey later reflected that she believed her mother was probably already dead when she saw her that morning. Over the years, she asked Albert repeatedly what had happened, and he gave her several different stories. At the time of her disappearance, Pauline had been scheduled to be questioned by the Maine State Police regarding the murder of Janet Baxter, who had been killed in November. While Albert did not know Janet, he became seemingly obsessed with the case after her murder, even taking Pauline and Honey to visit the crime scene. Pauline had confided in a relative that she was afraid Albert might be involved in Janet's murder. Pauline vanished before she could be interviewed by the police. After Pauline disappeared, Albert was questioned but never admitted to killing her. However, he did tell police that he knew her body was in a well. Acting on this information, police checked several wells based on Albert's instructions, but they found no trace of Pauline. Albert's past was also troubling. In 1964, 12 years before Pauline's disappearance, Albert's family was tragically murdered in Joliet, Illinois. At the time, Albert was separated from his wife, Patricia Cochran, who lived alone in an apartment with their 3 children, ranging in age from 10 months to 3 years old. Patricia was found strangled, and the children were all stabbed to death, their bodies left in the bathtub. Albert initially confessed to strangling his wife, but denied any involvement in the deaths of the children. He claimed that Patricia had killed the children, and he had killed her in a rage after discovering their bodies. Later, Albert made a second confession in which he claimed responsibility for killing all of them, though he never signed that confession. He was charged with all 4 deaths, but during his trial, he agreed to plead guilty to the murder of his wife, Patricia, while the charges related to the children were dropped. Albert was sentenced to 50 to 75 years in prison for Patricia's murder, but he served only 11 years before being paroled. It remains unclear whether Pauline knew about his conviction when she agreed to live with him. In 1999, Albert was convicted of Janet Baxter's murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died in 2017 at the age of 79 while serving his sentence. Despite his criminal history, Albert was never charged in connection with Pauline's disappearance, and her body has never been found. Due to the circumstances surrounding her case, foul play is suspected, though her case remains unsolved. Sixteen-year-old Kathy Marie Moulton disappeared from Portland, Maine, on September 24, 1971. At the time, she was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed approximately 98 pounds. Kathy had blue eyes, which were framed by thick glasses, and her light brown hair was straight. She also wore braces. Those who knew her described Kathy as a deeply caring and kind-hearted person. Born on June 28, 1955, to Claire and Lyman Moulton, Kathy had 2 younger sisters, Pamela and Kimberly. The Moulton family was known to be firm but loving, and it was clear that Kathy inherited her compassionate nature from her parents. Kathy was known to spend much of her time babysitting for family friends or simply offering companionship to those in need, such as sitting with a paralyzed family friend despite his speech impairment or spending time with the elderly neighbors. She was a selfless young girl with a bright future ahead, one filled with love and a desire to help others. The summer of 1971 was an eventful one for the Moulton family, as Kathy's father, Lyman, took a break from his business to embark on an 81-day road trip across the United States and Mexico. This trip was a significant experience for Kathy, marking the first time she had ever traveled outside of Maine. It was during this trip that Kathy celebrated her 16th birthday, and her parents let her choose any gift from the places they visited. She chose a small leather handbag while they were in Mexico. Kathy enjoyed the trip immensely, and when she returned to school in the fall, her friends noticed that she seemed noticeably happier than before. On Friday, September 24, 1971, Kathy was particularly excited. She had been looking forward to attending a dance that night at the local YMCA with several of her friends. Kathy loved music and swing dancing, and she had even made her own outfit for the event. After attending study hall at school, Kathy asked her father to drive her to the downtown shopping area of Portland. She needed a new pair of pantyhose for her outfit, and her mother also asked her to pick up toothpaste while she was out. Kathy's father dropped her off on the corner of Cumberland and Forest Avenue around 1:15 p.m., and he watched her walk up the street. Kathy shopped for a while before meeting up with her friend, Carol Starbird, at a local store called Starbird Music. They chatted about the dance, which they were both planning to attend later that evening. Kathy mentioned that she had spent the bus fare her mother gave her, so she planned to walk home. She explained to Carol that she would go home for dinner, take a quick shower, and then meet her later at the dance. After parting ways with Carol at around 5:30 p.m., Kathy was last seen walking down Forest Avenue wearing a navy blue coat and carrying the leather handbag she had chosen in Mexico. Her walk home was only about 1.5 miles, and it should have taken her only a short time to get there. However, Kathy never made it home. She didn't show up for dinner, and she didn't arrive at the dance that evening. Her parents, growing concerned, became anxious when she failed to call and let them know she would be late. Kathy's mother, Claire, recalled that their family always called if they were going to be late, so when Kathy didn't call, they immediately knew something was wrong. At around 6:30 p.m., Claire called the police to report Kathy as missing. She explained that Kathy had never gone anywhere without letting someone know, and she insisted on filing a missing persons report. However, in line with standard protocol at the time, the police initially told her she would have to wait 72 hours before they would take any action. This response was incredibly frustrating to the Moultons, and Lyman Moulton, Kathy's father, went to the police department in person to demand action. At first, the officer at the desk tried to dismiss his concerns, explaining the facts of life and attempting to turn him away. But Lyman persisted, and finally, they allowed him to file the missing persons report, though he later recalled it was more of an effort to shut him up. Despite this, Kathy's case received very little media attention in the aftermath of her disappearance. Only a small article with her picture appeared in a few local newspapers, which was hardly enough to bring widespread awareness to her case. Unsatisfied with the lack of progress, Mr. and Mrs. Moulton contacted the director of the Portland FBI office, hoping for further help. However, they were told that without evidence of an abduction, the FBI couldn't initiate an official investigation. Still, the director managed to have Kathy's picture featured at the end of several episodes of a television show called The FBI. At the time, the Portland Police Department did not have specific funding for missing persons cases. Additionally, authorities often prematurely classified missing teenagers as runaways, which meant that Kathy's case was buried among hundreds of others, all of which lacked proper attention. The Moultons quickly realized they would have to search for Kathy on their own. A local boy claimed that an older friend of his had given Kathy a ride on the day of her disappearance, but this lead never amounted to anything. In early November of 1971, while clearing out Kathy's locker at Deering High School, authorities found a scrap of paper with a phone number written on it. The Moultons were hopeful that it would lead to something, but it turned out to be the number to Mr. Moulton's workplace. There were multiple reports of sightings of someone matching Kathy's description, including one man who claimed to have picked up a boy and a girl with an unusual handbag and dropped them off at a Brunswick center. Another person reported seeing someone who looked like Kathy hitchhiking on Route 88, which was only a 13-minute drive from Portland. However, none of these leads turned into anything concrete. The Moultons also heard a rumor at Kathy's high school that she had been heading south to Boston. This seemed plausible since Kathy had expressed interest in the city during a conversation with a friend. However, no evidence supported this theory, and the Moultons even consulted a psychic named Alex Tenyus, who suggested that Kathy might have been picked up by someone and headed south toward Boston. Unfortunately, Tenyus could offer no further insights, and no new evidence emerged from this lead. Another theory that arose was that Kathy had left voluntarily with a friend, Lester Everett, who was driving a stolen 1963 blue Cadillac. Reports claimed that Kathy had been seen working on a potato farm 300 miles north of Portland with Everett and another boy, but these claims were never confirmed. Police eventually located Everett, but he denied having any knowledge of Kathy's whereabouts. Another lead suggested that Kathy was seen with two boys at a gas station in Presque Isle, Maine, but when the Moultons traveled there to investigate, the Presque Isle police had never even heard of Kathy's disappearance. After spending time going door to door and handing out flyers, the Moultons learned that the girl who had been mistaken for Kathy was actually a missing person from Connecticut. Frustrated by the lack of coordination between police departments and by the lack of progress in finding their daughter, the Moultons reached out to several high-ranking officials, including Senator Margaret Chase Smith, but they remained no closer to answers. Throughout this time, the Moultons kept their home open and their phone line active, hoping that Kathy would one day return. They left Kathy's room untouched, waiting for the possibility that she would come home. In the years that followed, there was little progress in the case. It was reopened in the 1980s, but no new evidence was found. In 1983, a hunter discovered a human skeleton near Smyrna, Maine, surrounded by female clothing. Though the hunter couldn't retrace his steps, police searched the area for 3 days, but nothing conclusive was found. Later, in 2004, the hunter was interviewed again, and cadaver dogs were used in another search, but it proved unsuccessful as well. Kathy's disappearance remains one of the oldest cold cases in Maine's history. Despite DNA testing against Jane Doe remains found across the United States over the years, no matches have been found. In a 2013 interview, Kathy's father, Mr. Moulton, expressed his greatest fear, that he would die without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. Sadly, his fear became a reality when he passed away in 2017, still without answers. The Moultons, however, continue to hold out hope that one day, Kathy will be found, or at least that they will have answers about her fate. Even today, the Moultons still live in the same house, keeping the same phone number in hopes that Kathy will one day reach out. If she is still alive, Kathy would be 68 years old today. While the likelihood of her still being alive is slim, her family still hopes for a resolution. Kathy's case remains unsolved, and the Moultons continue to hold on to the hope that they will one day have the answers they've sought for over half a century. Anyone with information about Kathy's disappearance is urged to contact the Portland Police Department at 207-874-8479.